Welcome to SHI's Research Breakdown, where we turn complex research into quick conversations that matter to your business. Today's conversation draws on the Gartner research report, How Enterprise PC Buyers Can Prepare for the AI-Driven Memory Shortage, which featured in the February 20th issue of the Research Roundup LinkedIn newsletter. I'm Victoria Barber. I head up the Strategic Insights function here at SHI, and today I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Adam Reiser, Associate Vice President of End User Compute, and Dave Groover, Field CTO. Thank you both so much for joining me. This research points out that volatility isn't a new feature of the memory market, but OEMs usually overcome this by locking in pricing and availability well in advance. The current situation has come about because their suppliers are unable to honour these commitments, causing a sudden and severe shortage of memory. So, Adam, when we first started hearing about this, what was the initial reaction that we saw from both customers and OEMs?
From the customer side, it's just adding to the uncertainty of the industry right now, right? There's so much change and so much going on in terms of new product and everything being released. This just add a whole another layer of fear and uncertainty and doubt, as they say in the market. So our customers very much were coming to us asking for assistance on how do we make sure that we're navigating through our refresh cycles in the proper way and not just in the standard way. What we're hearing a lot of is, are we refreshing at the right time? What devices or what tools can we use to help navigate through our infrastructure and our ecosystem and make sure that we're taking advantage and maximizing ROI. The other big reaction we heard was around asset recovery and around how do we utilize those sort of services to mitigate some of this. It can enhance budgets and as well as look at the residual values of the older devices that are being replaced and mitigate some of these cost increases. And so that's what we were seeing a lot from the customers is just help. What do we do next and what's the right way to go about this? On the partner side, it's been very vague. There's a lot of uncertainty still, and we saw a lot of rapid change from the partners. Everyone's a little bit nervous to make any outright statements, and so it's been quite a trip to navigate through the last few months. I will say that we're starting to see it plateau a little bit, and so some of the pricing increases have slowed. Customers and partners have sort of figured out what is the right methodology to go forward, and we're starting to see a little bit of balance of the chaos and a little bit of normalcy and some deadlines and timelines we can count on to ensure that we're helping everybody, the customers and the partners, in the best way possible.
I think, Adam, it's interesting, right? Because most of these IT shops, I think almost all of them, their purchasing budgets were set back in the summer, fall of 2025. And we were already seeing indication of, but the price shocks really started hitting Q4, Q1. And they're all in that mode of, hey, I had X amount of dollars to buy Y amount of PCs, and now it's going to be Y minus whatever because of the price increases and that challenge they have of, okay, if I can, instead of getting 1,000 new devices, I can only get 800 or 900 new devices with that same money. How do I triage that in my business? And I think that's where, the conversations I've had has really been around that. How do I make the right decisions given I'm not going to be able to do what I thought I was going to be able to do? And how do I really be wise in my choice of who do I refresh when? And that idea of, you and I have talked about many times, this idea of intelligent refresh really comes to the forefront.
Yeah, it's interesting that obviously the initial focus was on price, and clearly that has budgetary impacts because people have to decide whether they move budget from elsewhere to this or whether they just try and make do with what they've got. But it seems that while initially the response was this is going to cost more, the actual problem has become availability for an awful lot of this kit.
Yeah, it's a little bit of deja vu back to 2021, isn't it? I guess to some degree, we've all been through it. So I think people are a little better prepared, but it's certainly pushing customers to think about being more diverse in their supply chain choices, more diverse in their platform choices. We see shops that were, very staunch Windows shops now considering more Apple. That's a common thing because it's a bit of a different silicon supply chain. We see it with them looking, if they were an Intel shop, they might be, more embracing of AMD than they were previously. Or if they were a single vendor shop, now they're looking at multi-vendor strategies, just anything they can do to mitigate risk and position them going forward so they don't have a big shock to their own system.
So actually, then this might have some benefits for people because it'll take them down a route that perhaps might make them more resilient in the long term anyway. This
100%.
might actually be the driver to do what they should have been doing all along, which is avoiding vendor lock-in and giving themselves much more flexibility and ability to respond to exactly the situation that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it already, right? And I think when you look back to the last time we went through something similar, and we're not at that level that we were yet in 2021, that's for sure. But there's certainly concerns, and there was a lot of lessons learned in the last, shortage and supply shortage that we had. What we're seeing already, though, is to your point of diversification, not just on logo of device, but also of platform and architecture. So, when you think back to 2021, that's when AMD grabbed a lot of share of the market and have maintained that. I think this is another opportunity, and Apple did as well because they had supply then too, but in not as big of a way. To Dave's point earlier, that Apple is really going to make some waves with their new announcement and have a supply and availability seems to be in good shape. I also think this is a moment for Qualcomm to really make some noise and have customers really investigate ARM in a real way on a Windows platform. So I think this is a potential turning point moment for some shifting around and other OEMs and silicon vendors becoming more of a true player.
That's, it's interesting too. I always say this to our customers, the IT shops I talk to, all these people, they have a full-time job, keeping the lights on, keeping their business running. And now they've got this added layer of complexity they've got to deal with, potentially additional testing, additional validations. Adam talks about Qualcomm. Will ARM run effectively with the application stack I have? And that's where we've really been trying to shore up our lab services to help customers make those decisions without crippling their own IT staff. And that's a big part of it too, is really for the customers looking for additional expertise and resources to augment what they're doing and making sure they're making a well-founded decision. But it's a hard thing for them because they're already very busy just working through their day.
Yeah, so obviously being more flexible in the hardware that you're using, as you say, logos, platforms, architecture is one way of looking at it. So that deals with hopefully the availability issue. If it's available, then you can consider, is that something I can use? But what are the other kind of tactics that people can use to get them through this? And some of those may be short term, others may be actually a longer term change in strategy.
One of the things we're seeing quite a bit is around leveraging DaaS and financing models. It's a way to stretch budgets over time and a way to help mitigate and lock in a price now and be able to budget more properly in an uncertain time. So we are seeing an uptick in those conversations for certain.
Is that device as a service or desktop as a service? Because DaaS can be one or the other.
Sorry, yeah, device as a service. Yeah, there's a lot of acronyms out there. Device as a service or just straight financing, to be honest. So we're seeing a lot more conversations and uptick in there. And then, I mentioned it earlier, the asset recovery services is another great way to mitigate this risk, enhance budgets with residual values. I think one thing that's being lost in all the news about the new devices going up so fast is that residual values of older devices are going up faster and customers are downsizing. There's devices sitting in rooms collecting dust that have real value that are going up weekly.
So is that because other people can use the lower spec devices, or is that because they're harvesting the parts, or a combination of the two?
Combination of the two, but more the latter.
It's almost, you can take it back again, going back to 2021, 22, where I look at it the same as what happened with automobiles, right? Where new supply was constrained and also used car prices went through the roof, right? It's a similar situation. And so, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity. And that's where we see customers that sort of dabbled in that. If they can build a program around that and be much more intentional about it, customers that do a well-managed device return program can see up to 20% increase in value returned on those devices. And that's an important part, to Adam's point, that can mitigate those budget shocks going forward. The other thing is we're seeing customers look at repurposing their old devices, and now the other side of DaaS, desktop as a service, moving to things like W365 and taking that old laptop or desktop and, whether you use Chrome Flex or IGELs or whatever, put a thin OS on the device, use it as a thin client, extend its life that way. And that's something we're seeing a number of customers look into.
So obviously these kind of changes, looking at the specification, looking at how you can use things differently, do these require more data, more insights, more analysis than people have been used to in the past, rather than just going, well, there's this number of devices I bought X number of years ago. These are the ones that I bought, so these are the ones I'll chuck out. You've actually got to go and say, does that person need something new? in order to be able to do their job.
I think the easy button that we've all been living in is time-based refresh. Every 3, 4, or 5 years, we replace that laptop or desktop. To do it right, you really want to look at performance-based refresh and performance by persona. So that data analyst, they might be maxing out that 3-year-old device. And so maybe you get them a new device, but you give that device to somebody who's more of a administrative worker, just lives in office and the web and things like that. And so that ability to have the data, that you've got to have the telemetry from the device. You've got to be able to process that data and make those decisions. But we're seeing, the uptick in the interest in DEX tools is huge right now. I think almost every conversation we have with a customer involves a DEX conversation because they want to make those data-driven decisions.
Yeah, that's spot on. I mean, we're seeing that at every step of the way. And even new DEX players coming out, I feel daily, right? It started out with a year ago, we would have said there was maybe 2 or 3 key players. I think there's probably a dozen now. And now we're talking about hooks into Intune and device management platforms that'll be able to give us, true device telemetry and data and insights and predictive maintenance. I think that sort of focus is so key. And I think the one thing that Dave said that don't want to brush over is it's very persona based, right? And so I think we are seeing very much a dive into who's using this, why are they using it, what do they need it for? And let's get very, very specific about what we're buying and not just whatever's available.
Or even are they using it in some cases, I suspect maybe.
Also true.
Absolutely. The other side of that coin too is once you have that ability to understand how your users are using the hardware they have, then you're going to do a better job of picking the hardware they need. You've got really experienced people in these IT shops that have a good gut feel, empirical evidence that, we should go to 32 gig. We should go to an i7 or a Strix this or a, Snapdragon that as the right platform. But it's not necessarily a data-driven decision. So now if you know that, here's the load that this personas get put on the device, now let's go benchmark and ensure we have the right device to match that so that our new spend, we're not overspending, we're not underspending, and really being more precise about that. And so it all kind of comes together in that full life cycle loop that everything has a data-driven element to it in the choice, the deployment, the usage, the monitoring. Where does it go at end of life? That just becomes kind of a very virtuous cycle financially when you do it right.
Yeah, I think, we've been through a period where it's effectively your laptop, your desktop, it's just been a commodity, right? They went from being very expensive, significant corporate investment to basically a replacement for the notebooks in the stationery cupboard. Okay, maybe not quite that much, but it's harder to get a notebook and a pen now in some organizations than it is to get a laptop. And I think this is maybe making people refocus, and it's going to have sustainability benefits as well as cost management benefits. And it's clearly going to have an impact on people's effectiveness because there are going to be people who've never had the right kit in the past who, with this data, are actually going to get the things that allow them to be much more effective in their role. I don't like just talking about productivity because it's not just about the number of keystrokes that we all put into the device every day. It's whether what we do actually has an impact at the end of the day. And this, I think, is going to be where we can really make a difference to that.
I think that's a key point too, because, we started out this discussion really focused on the economics of the situation, right? And you can't lose sight of user experience. Having these type of telemetry tools folded into this whole mix gives you the visibility to see better what's going on with your end users. What are their boot times? What are their application launch times? What are their failure rates? Those type of things that you can then be more proactive about. And all of a sudden, instead of somebody going, frustrated, waiting for that PC to boot up or waiting for that application launch, they're just doing their work. The technology fades into the background. They focus on their job. And I think that's ultimately where you need to get.
So one of the things that came up in this Gartner research was, I think these tie together, the importance of understanding the business priorities and the critical requirements to build into your planning, but also to do scenario planning because things are changing so much that you need to have much more flexibility. You can't go into 2026, 2027 with a fixed plan. That, I think, is pretty clear to everybody. It feels like we're in a very complex environment and we can't just sit there and say, we've made a plan, now let's go with it. We have to review on a regular basis.
Yeah, when you get in these situations, flexibility is key. I think that is very, very accurate. The only way to navigate through this is the ability to pivot and change at a minute's notice based on availability and productivity and who's using what and what is the right tool for the job. So I know we're telling people to be much more intentional about it too, but you have to have a level of flexibility, and that comes from to what we started with, certifying on all platforms, certifying on all logos, and being able to ensure to offer the full breadth of the IT portfolio to the end user to make sure that they're as productive as possible.
I think it goes back to, isn't it, what is it, Mike Tyson that said everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the face? It's one of those deals, and it's sort of what's happening. But I think, yeah, that ability to be agile in their approach for customers to, step out of their existing routine and look at other opportunities is just huge right now. And those that do that well will weather this better than the others.
This has been a really helpful and insightful discussion. I think it's good for us to be able to take a step back and realize that there are alternatives out there, that we can cut through all the FUD that's been thrown around with the idea that, we need to panic and stockpile PCs just in case we can't get what we need. So thank you very much. Thank you to our listeners. You can find details of the research we've discussed in the show notes, and you can find more episodes of the research breakdown, including other episodes discussing the impact of the memory shortage, wherever you get your podcasts. And you can sign up to the research roundup on SHI's LinkedIn page. SHI Media. You heard it here.